And hello, folks. Once again, into the breach. A little bit different today because it is Thursday. We have a special guest for you this week. So, because we're coming to you tonight, there will be no show tomorrow night. So, just a very special guest. And because Adrian went ahead and booked this guest all by herself, as my cousin said, all by myself. I'm going to let her go ahead and take the reins once again tonight. And so, why don't you tell us a little bit about the guest tonight, Adrian?
Well, let's go ahead and bring him in. And we have the honor of having special guest, Father Vincent Lampert.
And here he is.
Father Vincent, thank you so much for coming on the show. I was just telling our audience that we have a special honor tonight in that you've agreed to come in and talk to us about your work in the field of really almost being an evangelical pastor for God and what God is doing in the lives of people, and doing that interestingly through exorcism. But something I noticed today is like you're pastor of two churches. One church, and I love this, is St. Michael the Archangel Church. And I'm like, what an appropriate fit, right? With St. Michael being the defender. And your beautiful book we'll talk about also tonight. And so two churches in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis and the Exorcist for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. Is that correct?
Yes, Adrian, that is correct. It's a pleasure to be with you and to join your show this evening.
Well,
and
thank you very much.
To help give people a glimpse into the world and ministry of exorcism.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just astounding because, well, tell us first of all how you became a priest, and then when you were a priest, how did you become an exorcist?
I was ordained a priest for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis back on June the 1st of 1991. So I just celebrated my 32nd anniversary earlier this month.
Congratulations.
And 18 years ago, in 2005, the Archbishop of Indianapolis appointed me to be the exorcist. So every Catholic bishop is the exorcist in his diocese, and then at his discretion, he can appoint one or more of his priests to do this ministry in his name. So back in 2005, the exorcist in Indianapolis, he passed away due to cancer. And after he passed away, the Archbishop was looking for a new priest to appoint. So most of the priests were trying to stay away from the bishop. But then I was at a meeting with him, and he told me that he was appointing me to take on this role here in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, which really is most of central and southern Indiana.
Wait, and did you want to do such a thing? Had you thought about it?
You know, I had never thought about it. The priest before me, ironically, was the pastor of the grade school parish that I attended. So never dreamed that one day I was going to inherit his job. The bishop said he picked me because he wanted a priest who believed in the reality of evil, but not one who would be too quick to believe that everyone who came to me who thought they were dealing with the demonic, that was the actual case. So he said that he thought I would be a good candidate, that I would bring a well-balanced kind of approach to this ministry.
That sounds it sounds like you could fall off the horse on either side there in terms of thinking Satan's everywhere. I think C.S. Lewis talked about that a little bit in some of his writings, is that we can either see the devil in everything, or we can believe he's not an entity. And so, yeah, I can see where the other thing that strikes me, I've listened to quite a few of your tapings on podcasts, is how calm you are. And I'm like, well, I mean, that's got to help too, right?
I was going to say, I think the ministry of exorcism really the focus is on God and what
Mhm.
God wants to do in people's lives. It's not really focused on the devil. Usually that's what gets people's attention, but in
Mhm.
reality it's all about bringing people into a closer relationship with God, because ultimately where God is present, an unclean spirit cannot remain.
That is comforting.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is comforting. What was it like in 2005? Because were there a lot of exorcists in the United States, or did we have a shortage?
I would say that when I was appointed, I became one of only 12 Catholic exorcists in the United States who had been appointed by their local bishop. And the church says the best way to learn the ministry is through the apprenticeship model, to work under a seasoned exorcist. But since there were so few, my bishop sent me to Rome in the early part of 2006. So I had the opportunity to spend 3 months in Rome and then to mentor under a Franciscan priest who, during that period of time, allowed me to sit in and witness 40 exorcisms that he performed during my time there in Rome.
That's incredible. What was it? What was it like walking into that situation, not having? I'm assuming you didn't have a background in being in that situation.
Not at all. Not at all. You know, it's really when I arrived at the parish there in Rome, there were about 50 people outside in the courtyard who were waiting to see this priest. Some of them had appointments, some did not. Some of them were actually manifesting. So the demonic was manifesting in some of these people while they're in the courtyard. So all kinds of things are going on. So I'm walking up because this priest again had arranged for me to meet him at his parish and to sit in on these exorcisms. So just that whole initial scene, walking up and seeing people who were afflicted by the demonic and who were seeking help, it was kind of entering into a whole different world, if you will.
Did it seem almost surrealistic? I mean, like, did you ask yourself, am I really seeing this? Or how were people manifesting?
There were some people that were shouting and screaming, other people, bodily contortions, convulsions. And again, these were not people who were dealing with any type of physical or mental situations. They were people who had been determined already who to be dealing with the demonic and who wanted to receive exorcism prayers.
So was this at the Vatican?
You know, I lived at the Vatican when I was there, and then the parish I went to was outside of the old city walls of Rome. Used to walk,
Okay.
if people are familiar with Rome, I would walk down from the Vatican to the Fountain of Trevi. There is a
Mhm.
bus stop. There's a Burger King right across the street from it. And I would get on a city bus and take about a 20-minute bus ride to this church that was outside the old city walls. And then that's
Okay.
where it was called St. Lawrence Church. And I would go there, and then about 3 times a week for the next 3 months, I would go in and
Mhm.
sit in on exorcisms that were being performed.
That's cool. Interesting that we're talking about Rome tonight, because I actually in 2003 I had graduated high school, and our show choir actually went to Italy for our senior trip that year.
Oh.
So actually got to sing in the Vatican. That was for a Lutheran kid out of Minnesota. It was quite the trip.
So yeah, for sure. I'm going to Rome for my first time over Thanksgiving of this year. And is the church that you went to, was it St. Lawrence, you said?
St. Lawrence outside the walls.
It's still there, I imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very active parish there on the
Nice.
outskirts of Rome. Yes.
Nice. Well, so for I think I have a good idea from the Bible, but what is a demon? And what I struggle with is, well, what's a spirit? What's a ghost? What's a
Mhm.
demon? Kind of like the ABCs of there's this entity and this entity. And one of the things, and I'm throwing multiple questions out, but one of the things that's very popular right now is ghost hunting. And so I'm like, how does all of that tie in? And like, can you just dial up a ghost without getting a demon? And so maybe start with us, if you could. I'll backtrack a little bit. Tell us from your expertise, what's a demon versus a ghost?
So a demon is a fallen angel. So God created the angelic world sometime before our creation, as mentioned in the book of Genesis. And the belief is that after God created the angelic world, he gave them intellect and free will. And then God basically said, with the knowledge that he had given to them, would they choose to honor and glorify God? The book of Revelation talks about how 1/3 of the stars fell from the sky, and that's seen as the fall of the angelic world. So 1/3 of the angels fell. They referred to Lucifer as their chief, and they were cast out of heaven. They weren't cast out of creation. God can still use them for whatever purpose God may have. And then these demons were cast down to the earth, where they will roam until the final judgment at the end of time. And the goal of these evil spirits now would be to try to convince humanity to make the same poor choice that they themselves have made, namely to reject God. Now, some people will ask questions about spirits and ghosts. An exorcist will tell you that 99% of the time, when people say they're encountering some type of spirit, that again, 99% of the time, it's an evil spirit that may be trying to give the false impression that there's some type of a friendly ghost, if you will, as a way to lure people into the world of deceit and darkness. Because ultimately, when a person dies, we can no longer choose to act in this reality. We can choose to ignore God while in this life, but when we die, we all have to operate within whatever dictates that God has laid out. So for the soul of one who has died to manifest or act in this reality, God has to be the one permitting that to happen for whatever reason God may have. Because the reality with spirits is, we technically would say they're neither here nor there because they don't have a body. We say they're here or there if they're choosing to act in a location. So it's not that a spirit is living at an abandoned prison or hospital. Usually it's the very things that people are doing there that are attracting the attention of these evil spirits, which is causing them to manifest in that location. But again, 99% of the time, when people say they're encountering a ghost, it's really a evil spirit.
Evil spirit being demonic.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
What's your theory on residual hauntings? So not something that you can talk to through, like, the spirit box or a recording, but just like a daily going on. Basically, that's what a residual is it's a taped playing over and over what they think of what was going on at that time.
Mm-hmm. I think people need to realize that these evil spirits are very intellectual. And even after the fall of these angels, they do not lose their intellectual qualities, but they become darkened. So a lot of times when people believe they're engaging with these spirits and maybe they think they're in charge, really they're like the cat and we're the mouse. That they're just playing and toying with us because they know that intellectually they are so much greater than we are.
I think I've read, I was reading in your book, and the one thing that struck me that I did not fully realize until reading what you had written and thinking about it is that angels, the angelic, whether whichever way they chose to stay an angel or become a demon, they were given 100% of the knowledge right then in their existence when they were created. And I'm like, and you point out, like, as humans, we're learning all the time. And it just really struck me that they know so much, and they have past knowledge, right? So if there's an evil spirit, they're going to have past knowledge of things as well. Is that right?
Correct. So when the angels were created, we would say that they received infused knowledge. It's like a computer being downloaded with information. They don't have to go and learn something. They can just call it up. So a demon would never be able to say, well, I didn't know that. Because even when God gave the angels the choice after he created them to use their knowledge to honor and glorify God, they could see that one of the possible consequences would be their eternal damnation. And yet, even with that possibility, 1/3 of the angels still chose to rebel against God. And an angel that's fallen can never change. So the fallen angels can never repent because, again, they could never say, I didn't know that. They can't continue to grow in knowledge and understanding because from the very first moment they were created, they were in the presence of all that they could know.
Yeah, that's a whole paradigm shift for me. And to me, it makes a lot of sense. And I also have always wondered, well, God is so gracious, and I think we need to choose who we follow, definitely. But God is so gracious with us, and somebody can accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, maybe even during a blessing of the ill, or and still can be saved. But the angels were different because they had everything. They knew everything. They, in a sense, weren't going to change their mind because they were fully full of that knowledge. But I'm just like putting my head around that. It's really amazing.
And I was going to say that it's really interesting to note that it's not that God wouldn't forgive, but these fallen creatures would never even consider repenting. They would never even consider asking for forgiveness. And so that's why they're set in their way. A good analogy is that iron, when it's being heated up, it can be molded and shaped into any structure, if you will. But once it becomes solidified, it is what it is. So these angels, when they chose to rebel against God, become solidified in that choice, remaining ever fixed on their rebellion against God. And the notion for Lucifer, his sentiment basically was, it's better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven.
Yeah, I'm just like, it'd be better to live on the doorstep of heaven to ever even to have to look at hell. I mean, so
Right.
hell is a place without God, and Jesus talked about it being like a place of torment.
Absolutely. Even these demons they're in torment to the extent that they know that their judgment has been already determined by the choice that they made. As Christians, the book of Revelation, Jesus stands at the door and knocks. He doesn't kick the door down and say, here I am. We have to open the door and let him into our lives. But just as much as we can invite Christ in, we can also tell him to get out. And we can say that these fallen angels told God to get out, and then God respects that. God will always respect our free will, but then they would never even consider inviting God back in.
And that was an interesting thing that you brought up, free will, because that is one thing that is always there. You can either choose to come to the altar, but at any time you can choose to leave.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Jesus never, you don't read in the gospel of him chasing down those people that just, the rich man, where he said, how do I get into heaven? And Jesus says, for you now, since you've followed all the 10 commandments, right? Like anybody could perfectly, but since you, that's what you're saying now, for you, you'd have to give up your your riches. And
Mhm.
he walked away. And, you didn't see those people being chased down by Jesus. There's that free will that God made us with.
Now you think of the prodigal son when he says to the father, "Give me my share of the inheritance that should come to me." The father gave it to him. It wasn't what the father desired, but he respected the choice that his son made. But then the father is always waiting for his son to return. I always tell people that the unique thing about Christianity is that it's not about our search for God, it's about God's search for us. If you think about it, the very first moment when Adam and Eve were cast out of paradise, God began a plan to go and search for lost humanity. Even Jesus, when he begins his public ministry, he's baptized in the Jordan by John the Baptist, and then he's driven into the desert by the Spirit. So he goes into the wilderness to do what? In search of lost humanity. But he has to contend with the devil first, because the devil is the one who brought about the fall of humanity. And then you think of many of the accounts in the New Testament. Jesus tells, the parable of, the 100 sheep, and one of them is lost. And the shepherd leaves the 99 and goes in search of the lost one. That's God's search for lost humanity. The woman with the 10 coins and loses one and sweeps the house in search of the lost one. There's lost humanity. When Adam and Eve had sinned, God moves to the garden and says, "Adam, where are you?" So God is always searching for us, but we have to respond to that call. And if we don't respond to the call, God will respect that, because ultimately, the only thing that we have that God does not have, that he desires, is our free will. God desires that we unite our free will with his will, and in doing so, complete our creation, if you will. Because freedom, in the true sense of the word, means to be obedient to God. When the human person fulfills God's plan for us by being obedient to God, living out the commandments, that's freedom in the true sense of the word. When we start believing that freedom means we can do whatever we want, then we end up becoming slaves to our own passions and desires. And ultimately, that's what the devil wants. He wants to create a truth that's contrary to God's truth as a way to trap humanity into sin.
Yeah. when you were talking about that, I was thinking of a few different things. When we walk away from God, I think that's our will. It's our will not to pray to him. It's our will if we choose not to go to church. It's our will if we walk away from maybe the way, like we were brought up I was brought up in a beautiful Catholic church, and walking away from God that's a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes in our society, even in myself, I just see a laziness, like I really need to recommit. I need to recommit myself. And I think God honors that. The one thing I was thinking about too was that, so if we are doing stuff like ghost hunting, or we're talking to mediums, are we not walking away from our faith a little there? I mean, and opening ourselves up?
I think we are. In the book of Deuteronomy, in chapter 18, verses 10 through 12, it talks about not doing these types of activities, consulting the spirits of the dead, asking ghosts and spirits for help, and that type of thing. So a lot of times people will say, well, it's just fun and entertaining. But again, we have to ask whether or not our actions are consistent with our Christian belief. And if they're not consistent with our Christian belief, then we should turn our lives around. People that may be engaged in these things, I don't cast judgment on folks. I want them to be aware of maybe what they're doing is not the best choice, and then to repent and turn their lives around. Even the saints of the church were not perfect people. You look at their past, and a lot of them, their past was very colored, but yet they overcame that sinfulness and they dedicated their lives to God. Because ultimately, I don't believe God cares where we've been. God cares where we are. You think of the good thief on the cross. We don't even know why he's being crucified. And he doesn't even ask to be saved. He just says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus is able to look into his heart and see the goodness there at that moment, and then says, this day you will be with me in paradise. So there's that great line I think we've all heard, that every saint has a past, but every sinner has a future. And anyone who may be engaged in activities or things that is contrary to how God would have us live, all we need to do is turn our lives around, and God is always ready to welcome us home.
Yeah, I just think about because I the paranormal does kind of interest me. I'm like, and I have to stop myself and say, am I more interested in God? Am I giving this time to paranormal, but I'm not dedicating myself to God? And I think that's a big issue,
Right.
For me. And so I've really backed away from it. And it's just to, it's almost like it's tempting for some people, because there's that scintillation, that people get, whether it's a scary movie or, the thought of watching Ghost Hunters, that type of thing.
And that might even raise the question, why do we feel bad maybe for the things we do? Is it because, we're afraid of being punished? Or ultimately it should be that we don't want to hurt and defend, or, hurt the one that we love, namely God himself. So our motivation should not be to be people of faith because we're afraid of hellfire and brimstone, but really of hurting the one we love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautifully said. I have been wondering, and someone else asked me too, that's very dear, to ask about cross-generational curses. There is a verse in the Bible that mentions generation, or I don't know if it's the same one as sins of the fathers, but there's cross-generational curses that come down. What, in your understanding experience, what are cross-generational curses?
Cross-generational curses could be ones that are passed down through the family line by one who has authority over the family. And, there's a reference in the book of Exodus that talks about how the sins of the father are passed down to the third and fourth generation. There's also a passage in the book of the prophet Ezekiel that would say that that used to be the case, but now everyone is responsible for their own actions. I believe curses are only effective if we're weak in our faith. We can't control what another person has done, and we can't just act like we're poor victims of all those who came before us, because again, we can choose to be faith-filled people and to create a relationship with Christ. We can't simply say that because my great-great-grandfather did this, I'm completely doomed. No, we can open our eyes, we can repent, we can renounce all of that and break that curse against us. Because again, we can't control what another person does, but as a Christian, we can stand right in the eyes of God by, you go to church, you pray, you read the Bible. I always say that if we're doing those things, the devil is already on the run. So if anyone feels like there's some type of generational curse, then all they have to do is take ownership of that, renounce it, and the curse is broken, simply again by being a faith-filled person.
Right. And is there something in baptism that helps our children or our infants when they're baptized?
Absolutely. Because in baptism, too, there is even a minor exorcism prayer. There's that profession of faith that said, do you renounce Satan and all his works and all his empty promises? So there is that renunciation of Satan. I do think there's a lot of people that can be impacted by generational sin. If you grow up in a home where there's abuse or addictive behavior, that's going to have an impact on you. But there's a difference between saying, I've been impacted by the sins of those who came before me, and then saying that that sin is now my sin. So I think we can be impacted by sin, but like when it comes to baptism, we should believe that if we're born into a world of original sin, the fact that humanity is fallen, if you will, then baptism helps to put us in a state of grace. And that state of grace certainly is greater than any activity that the devil may be trying to do. And we should never, ever believe that God and the devil are on the same playing field. Again, God is the creator, and the devil is still a creature, a powerful one, a very intellectual one, but there's no way the devil even begins to compare with God. You know, I think of the first 10 words of the book of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. What does that tell us about God? He's outside of time because he created time in the beginning. God is outside of space. He created the heavens. And God is outside of matter. God created the earth. So God is outside of time, space, and matter as we understand it. But the devil is still a part of time, space, and matter because there was a time when the devil did not exist. And again, my point in all this is let's never believe that God and the devil are somehow equal opponents.
Yeah, there's not dualism there. I think it was
Right.
Luther that said the devil is God's devil, you know, that I think the point that he created them and he ultimately the devil will serve God's purpose.
Yeah, and that's that notion again that the devil was cast out of heaven, but he wasn't cast out of creation. It's also important to note that God did not create the devil because everything that God creates is good. But again, the devil became evil by his own free will, the choice that he made. Because sometimes people will make the statement, well, why did God create the devil? Well, God didn't create the devil. God created Lucifer. God only creates that which is good. But by the choices we make, we can take that inherent goodness in us and allow it to become distorted.
I have a couple of questions for you. To set those up, I was wondering if you could explain the difference between oppression and possession.
Yeah, I would say I would begin by saying there are 4 different types of extraordinary demonic activity. There can be demonic infestation. We've been talking a little bit about ghost hunting and paranormal activity. Infestation would have to do with the presence of evil in a location or maybe associated with an object, such as a voodoo doll. There is demonic possession, and then the 2 that you bring up, demonic oppression and then demonic obsession. Now, for oppression, it would be a physical attack. I prefer the word vexation, that a person is being vexed, if you will, by evil. The reason I like the term vexation is because I believe that oppression, demonic attacks, are a gift from God. The person didn't do anything wrong that brought on the demonic attacks, but God was permitting it to happen. Think again of Job in the Old Testament. God permitted Satan to afflict him, even though Job had done nothing wrong. St. Paul talked about the thorn in his flesh, the messenger from Satan who was sent to torment him to keep him from becoming proud. So as opposed to oppression, I prefer vexation. Those are physical attacks, but with vexation, somebody did something to open a entry point for the demonic into their life. But when it comes to oppression, it was something that God permitted as an opportunity for the person to show their fidelity to God and then to grow in holiness and virtue. Demonic obsession are mental attacks. The devil's literally trying to get into a person's head, whereby they can feel as if they're going crazy because everything that they are thinking or experiencing is being filtered through the demonic affliction that they're going through.
Okay. And I wanted to clarify that because I've been studying a couple of cases lately. The first case is probably well known. It's Amityville horror Amityville case where Ronald DeFeo Jr. ended up killing his whole family. And when they asked him if he did that, he didn't deny it, but he said that something came over him in the basement and actually put the rifle in his hand. And then the other case, pardon me, the other case is down in Mechanicsville, Georgia, at my friend's place called the Cabin on 360. There's a brick house on that property, and in the 1970s, there was a incident where a half brother killed his half sister, and they were saying that was a demonic possession as well. Have you heard a lot of cases where demonic possession leads to criminal cases, and i.e. murder, and what comes out of that?
Yeah, those cases can be really complicated. You think of the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose, where one who was possessed and then end up, dying as a result of all of that. The point I would make is that the devil can propose, but he cannot impose. The devil cannot force us to do anything against our will. You think again of the temptation of Eve in the garden, when the serpent presented the forbidden fruit, the serpent didn't take it and cram it down her throat, just presented it as something good. She had to make the choice to do that. So I've never been a big fan of that statement where people say the devil made me do it, because again, the devil can propose that we do something and present what he's talking about as a certain good, but the devil cannot force us to do anything against our free will.
Mm-hmm.
So in the case where somebody is committing murder, then the devil may be trying to convince them that what they're doing is actually a good as opposed to a wrong or evil act. But ultimately, we are responsible for the actions that we make.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think Adrian heard of a case. Wasn't that one where it went to court and they wanted to create, you can be...
I think there's been a couple cases. Are you asking about the defense?
Yeah. So it was like, if you're insane, they can say, well, you can't be tried for it. Well, that was like the defense, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll let you explain it to Father Lampert.
Well, the one I was thinking of here was a case in Connecticut with Ed and Lorraine Warren, where there was a murder that took place, and the defendant was saying that he didn't remember it and he was possessed, and there was some actual rituals being taken place in terms of exorcisms. I don't think by the archdiocese. I think it was underneath that. But anyway, it was, the judge just said, we're not going to put the devil on trial. It's not happening in my court. And I don't think it ever has happened where they allow that as a defense that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I know cases where they say that somebody is not mentally fit to stand trial. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you're right. I've never heard like the statement you just made where the devil is being put on trial. There's a lot of people today that don't believe in the devil as a reality, as evil personified. People may see the devil as a metaphor for humanity's inhumane treatment of one another. But again, from a Catholic perspective, evil is personified in what we call the devil and these other fallen angels. But ultimately, we are all responsible for the actions that we take. To say that the devil is the one who killed people, if the devil could really do that, the world would be even more chaotic than it already is. The devil doesn't have free reign. The devil can only do that which God permits him to do. He's still on a leash, if you will, because again, if he was running wild, there would be so much more death and destruction that we couldn't even imagine on such a grand scale.
I'm wondering if you would tell us about, I don't know if it's like not necessarily the day in the life of an exorcist, but the day, like, what would be, what do you go through in an exorcism? Once it's determined this person is indeed possessed. So, and I'm sure that's quite a process, and maybe you could outline that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no such thing as an emergency exorcism. From a Catholic approach, it's always a very methodical process, because ultimately, if the church would act too hastily, the church would end up doing greater harm than good. Because ultimately, when somebody believes they're possessed, their situation needs to be looked at spiritually, physically, and mentally. So the church would require someone to have some type of a psychiatric evaluation. The church will require someone to have a physical examination from a medical doctor. Again, asking experts in these fields, is there anything about this person's condition that is outside of your scope, your understanding, and your own knowledge? Step 3, I would sit down and meet with a person and do an intake questionnaire, trying to determine if this is demonic, what was the entry point for the demonic into this person's life. Again, most people don't have to worry about extraordinary demonic activity if they're living their lives right in the eyes of God. Step 4, I would look for 4 signs of possible demonic possession that are mentioned in the rite of exorcism: the ability to speak and understand languages otherwise unknown to the individual, having superhuman strength, having elevated perception, knowledge about things that I know that this person as an individual otherwise does not know, and then a very negative reaction to anything of a sacred nature, such as being in a church, having the Bible read in front of them, being blessed with holy water, being shown a crucifix, and so on. And then step 5 of the protocol is actually the most important one, and that's to help the person resume the spiritual life or to come to Christ for the very first time.
Mm-hmm.
I would even suggest that casting the devil out is the easy part. The harder part is to convince someone to invite God in. You know, we think of chapter 11 of Luke's gospel, that once the demon has been cast out, it goes and wanders through the arid wasteland, and then coming back and finding the house swept clean, meaning it's gone, but God hasn't been invited in. Then it goes and finds 7 other demons worse than itself, and they come and take up residence in the person. So
Not
in the ministry of exorcism, I'm trained to be a skeptic.
Yeah.
So I want to go through this process so that I know beyond a doubt that this is truly some demonic affliction that a person is going through.
It doesn't sound like a win-win when 7 more stronger demons come back in.
Right.
That's a horrible scenario.
And that's the reality today, is there are a lot of people that believe that they're possessed. And I will say, because I am publicly known, and when my bishop appointed me, he told me that I could be publicly known as a way to help educate people about the reality of evil and the way that we can always keep the devil at bay. But there's a growing trend today for people to view the exorcist as a magician, meaning people think that I have special powers and abilities. And I always tell people that if you're relying on me, we're all in trouble. But if we're relying on the power and the authority of Christ and the power of his name, that's the right mentality to have. But because faith is in decline today in the lives of many people, when people find themselves in dealing with the demonic, rather than turning to God, they want a quick fix. And somehow they believe that the exorcist can simply make their problems go away and they can be on their merry way without ever having to deal with God.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the demons probably make pretty short work of somebody who doesn't call on God and doesn't,
Right.
is not calling on the power and the name of God and is not right with God. And I was thinking when you were talking about it, well, they have knowledge they shouldn't have. And I've heard that the demons will know your sins. And is it true if they're not confessed, they'll say them out loud, or sometimes?
That can happen. And again, where does the demonic get that knowledge? It goes back to their angelic creation. that knowledge that they received from the first moment that they were created. That's why they can have elevated perception. That's why they could speak a language that I know that this person as an individual otherwise does not know. That allows me to know that in front of me is no longer Jane Doe, for example, but now the demon who is possessing the body of Jane Doe, using her eyes to see, her mouth to speak, her ears to hear. So again, I need to know that I am conversing, if you will, with a demon and no longer with that person as an individual.
So if they're speaking English and all of a sudden they start talking Aramaic, there's something up.
Yes, and because I've gotten to know the person, I would know that this person does not know Aramaic, for example. So that would be an indication that, okay, this is no longer Jane Doe speaking to me. It's now this demonic entity using that body as if it were its own.
You have you go in well prepared, and you follow the rights of the church, and you're going in under proper authority. But even with that, especially when you were new in EW, were you afraid at times?
I don't know if I would say afraid, apprehensive. Anytime you're dealing with the unknown, that can certainly bring about some apprehension. I would say after 18 years of doing the ministry, that's really gone now, because I know beyond a doubt that the power of God is greater than the power of the devil. And I've learned too not to focus on the theatrics of the devil, the manifestations that one sees during an exorcism, whether it's things like eyes rolled in the back of the head, foaming at the mouth, growling and snarling, bodily contortions, levitation, whether the body drops to the ground and slithers like a snake across the floor. The temperature in the room becomes much colder. The demon begins to speak with a deeper and authoritative voice. Again, I know these are all theatrics of the devil, who's trying to be like a child throwing a temper tantrum, who's saying, put the focus and attention on me. Whereas in an exorcism, I'm telling everyone, especially the demon, to put the focus on God.
Right. And so you've talked about the extraordinary activities of the devil, but one thing that I really glean from your book is that there are ordinary activities of the devil, and I think that should make us all sit up and take note, because can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think ordinary activity of the devil has to do with temptation, where the devil is trying to get us to fall into sin. Again, think of the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, where Satan then takes the forbidden fruit and convinces Adam and Eve to consume it. So the devil tries to tempt all of us, and in doing so, he wants us to derail us off our pathway to God. When it comes to the ordinary activity of the devil, I believe that he uses a 4-stage plan of attack against us. All the words begin with the letter D. It begins with deception, which leads to division, which leads to diversion, which leads to discouragement. So with deception, the devil wants us to buy into his lies. He wants to present his lie as the truth. But again, anything the devil says is a lie, because he is a liar and the father of lies. When people give in to the lies, what should we do? We should repent, because again, God is always ready to forgive and welcome us back into his fold. But when people give in to deception, think of Adam and Eve. The first thing they did was to go and hide. They didn't say to God, we sinned against you and we're sorry. They didn't repent. And so that deception led to division. They found themselves broken, which is why they hid. And when people are divided with that division, they try to put the pieces of their lives back together. But if what they're using is not God, they will only find themselves broken even more. When people are broken, you cannot turn to the world of the occult. That will not put your life back together. Going to see a psychic or a medium is not going to put your life back together. That is a diversion. One is looking for a substitute for God. You think of the Israelites who were on a journey through the desert to the promised land, who abandoned the worship of the one true God for a golden calf. So there is that sense of diversion, but that diversion will always leave us wanting more. St. Augustine, writing at the end of the 4th and early 5th century, said, you know, "O God, you have created us for yourselves, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." So now, if we look for a substitute for God, we will always be lost in wondering. And then ultimately, that diversion leads to discouragement. We begin to lose all sense of meaning, purpose, and direction in our lives. And when we arrive at discouragement, I believe it's a crossroads. One pathway leads to death, always spiritual, the complete rejection of God. Think of the United States today, where one out of every 5 Americans now say they are an atheist. But sometimes that discouragement, that death, is even physical. Think of the growing trend of suicide in our society today. But again, because we're Christians and a people of hope, we're always filled with joy because our focus is on God. The other pathway leads to discipleship, meaning people have a wake up call in their life and they recognize that what they are lacking is a relationship with God, and they go and pursue that. So again, the ordinary activity, it goes through deception to division to diversion to discouragement, and then either to death or to discipleship.
Yeah, and to me, it's like it's the enemy, like especially in modern society where a lot of people don't believe in the entity of the devil. They just believe, as you said, it in man's inhumanity to man. That gives Satan and his demons a huge advantage, right? Because if they're using these ordinary tactics on you and it's not extraordinary, you're not calling in, help. You can be. It's the deception part of it, right? I mean,
absolutely. The First John chapter 3 verse 8, the reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the work of the devil. So I would even suggest that to be a Christian is to recognize that we are in a battle against Satan himself. But if we are faith-filled people, we already know the outcome. God wins. And if we already know that, then to me, there should be no question about whose side we should choose to be on. Do you want to be with the victor, who is Jesus himself, dying on the cross and raised from the dead? Or does one want to choose to have Satan as their leader, if you will? But that's a pathway that just leads to destruction and ultimate death.
So we've got about 8 minutes left. And before we end for the night, I actually, Mom and I talked about this on another show that we were on.
Everybody who doesn't know, I am CR's mom.
Right. So we talked about it on another show. And when I was in high school, I had an acquaintance. We'll call him that. We were in school together. We were in choir together, and we always hung out. And right around that time, my parents had split up. The rocky time was heading towards a divorce. And they got saved by the local church here. Well, when they came back together, a couple from the church came up and blessed the house, and they had 2 sets of 4 nails that were blessed and intertwined in the shape of a cross, and those were set up above the one above the garage entrance and one above the front entrance to the house. And that comes into play because my buddy was dropping me off one time, and I wanted to invite him in to show him something, whatever I had. And we walked up to the front door, and he just, matter of fact, he said, "Hey, can we go in the garage?" I was like, "Oh yeah, no problem." So we go into the garage, and I go up into the service entrance, and I'm in the house, and I don't see that he followed me. Well, I look out, and he's standing like 5 to 10 feet away from the door, and I'm like, "What's going on?" He goes, "I can't come into the house." He goes, something's blocking me from the house. And Mom walked up at that point. What did you tell him at that point?
No, actually, I wasn't there then. I told him something later. I just gave him a hard witness because it did come out through you talking to him that he was into the demonic, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I just told him, kind of a witness. And
and that's why the cross is so powerful, because the moment that Jesus is dying, the devil believes that he had won. But the moment of his perceived victory is actually the moment of his defeat, because then he realizes that everything that he was doing that was leading Jesus to the crucifixion was actually playing into God's hands. It touches on what we were mentioning a few moments ago about how God can still use the devil. And so God uses him. So the whole crucifixion, that's why it's such a powerful tool, if you will, in defeating the devil, because it reminds the devil that he has been defeated.
Mm-hmm.
It also made me realize how blessings have a lot of validity. And you mentioned like holy water that's been blessed. And can somebody, if you threw tap water on somebody who said they were possessed, would they react versus holy water? Do they know the difference?
The person as an individual would not know that, but the demonic would, with their elevated perception. So even if I'm meeting with somebody and I'm trying to determine, is this truly demonic? Maybe I bless the person with tap water. Maybe I bless them with holy water. I will know whether or not it's been blessed. The demon will know, but that person as an individual will not. The thing about holy water, for example, the focus is not really on the water itself, but what it represents, namely our baptism into Christ. Mm-hmm. It's, Paul's letter to the Romans. Are you unaware that we who were baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death? So it points to something greater. We should never use the things in an exorcism as means in and of themselves. They always point to something greater. So the holy water is pointing to our new life into Christ. The crucifix that's being used is reminding the devil that he has been defeated before and he will be defeated again. So do not resist the power and the authority of Christ that he has given to the church. So it always points to something greater. I had a gentleman reach out to me one time who told me that his girlfriend was possessed and he did what he was supposed to do. And I said, what were you supposed to do? He said, I went down to the local bookstore and I bought an exorcism kit. He said there was a little plastic bottle to put water in. There was a cross in there and there was some oil and some sage. But he goes, none of that is working. And it reminded me of the story of, in the Acts of the Apostles, the 7 sons of Sceva, who are witnessing Paul and his companions doing an exorcism, and they simply mimic the actions, but there is no faith. So they believe that the true power are in these things, but the true power is always in Christ himself.
It always points back to Christ. It always points back to God. Yeah.
Well, we're right up on time here. And Father Lampert, I wanted to thank you for coming on. It's very informative, and it might get me, well, it might not. It will get me back on my path in faith. I haven't been as diligent in it as I need to be. And I think that all happened when COVID came about, because it was easier to stay home and we all got in that rut. But I wanted to thank you for coming on, and I wanted to thank you for sharing your faith. And, maybe some people out there that were watching this, maybe that gets them to look into their faith and the next steps that they need to. Adrian, anything else you wanted to add?
No, just thank you for your ministry and for your graciousness. I can't imagine. Here you pastor 2 churches, you're an exorcist, and you've agreed to come on our humble little podcast. And just thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
I think we're all in this together. We're all striving, hopefully, to have a relationship with God. We're all in a fight against what the devil may be trying to do to us.
Mhm.
So I think it's, to me, the ministry of exorcism is a form of evangelization. It's about helping people realize that when God has his rightful place in our lives, evil is nothing to fear whatsoever, not even the
Mhm.
devil himself.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank
my
you very
pleasure.
much, Father, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
All right, folks, that was Father Lampert. That was a great episode, and I just wanted to um, go through a couple of things, some housekeeping items, and then talk about what we're doing for next week. So because we had the show tonight, we won't have a show tomorrow night. Um, Adrian and I will enjoy a nice little 3-day weekend. And then next week is going to be July already. I can't believe it. Funny thing is what is it? Next Monday is my 29th,
You
39th birthday.
You wish
So
29, right?
right. I don't want to be 39. I'll be 29 again
Well, if you
all
were
over.
29, it would make me 10 years earlier. So
So that leads us into the 4th of July. And then the next show is on the 7th. And that's going to be with a good friend of mine and a classmate, Michelle Lancel. And that one is titled Demon in My Apartment. She once lived in an apartment that had an infestation. And so we were going to talk about what it was like to live in an area that has an issue with it. And then she also was able to get rid of the said demon. And we'll talk to her about that. The thing to know for next week's show is instead of 7, it's at 6 o'clock. So 6 o'clock CST instead of 7 o'clock. And then after that, the next show will be July 14th, and that's going to be you and a friend of yours on medical coding, correct?
right. So for those of you who have don't know what medical coding is, it is not coding for the computer. It's coding for our medical bills. And it's a fantastic career. I teach at Dakota County Technical College. We're going to talk about that with a current student who is vibrant and doing very well, and why she got into coding, what coding can do for you. Basically, join us. It'll be great. Then the next 2 Fridays after that, CR.
Yes. So the next 2 Fridays after that are going to be someone that we talked to before, and that would be Doc Z. Though we talked to him our very first 2 episodes. It was about the days of the USS Nimitz. Happens to be my father, but he was a hospital corpsman in the Navy in the late 80s. Let me just go ahead and find. Yeah, so after the 14th, the 21st, he was also, when he was in college, he worked for the U.S. Forest Service as a helitac crewman or a wildland firefighter. So we're going to talk to him about what it was like being in the Forest Service. We'll probably hear a couple stories of what it was like being on base and getting a call and going out and having to defend structure, what the difference is between wildland firefighting and structural firefighting. So kind of just a little interesting thing is, so if you live in town and you call the fire department, that's structural engineering or structural firefighting. That is defending a house or a structure or a building from fire. Wildland firefighting is there's a lightning strike in the woods and the forest is on fire, or someone's controlled burn gets out of control and is raging across the field of Johnson grass. That's when they will call somebody in to do that. So that is Friday the 21st. And then Friday the 28th, he'll be back on again, because not only was he a wildland firefighter, but he was a U.S. Forest Service park ranger. And he will talk about what it was like to live for a summer on the Bonanza Guard Station in southern Idaho. And we could almost have you on with that too, because I believe that was your honeymoon, correct?
Yeah, right. Yeah, we had the summer there, no electricity, but we had gas lights. We had a Forest Service radio. There were no phones and no cell phones at the time. So it was a cool adventure.
Propane powered curling iron.
Yeah, we always laugh because I'm like, people are like, well, how do you do with electricity? Well, we had gas lights and we had a refrigerator and I had my butane curling iron. What more do you need, right?
Right. So that will be set. That'll bring us into August. I can't believe we're talking about that far. I mean, summer just started, didn't
we
it?
need to stop because I have to go back to school in August and I'm doing just the summer. So
right. Well, that will put a nail in the coffin for tonight's show. Like we said, don't be looking for another show for us tomorrow, as we're going to take a 3-day vacation.
Yeah, and I do recommend, we still have the picture of Father Lampert's book, Exorcism, The Battle Against Satan and His Demons. Excellent book. You can get it on Amazon or probably order it from a bookstore or get it at the library perhaps. And then there is not his book, but one he recommends, the Devil You Don't Know, if you want to be able to identify more about the ordinary activities of the devil. So really, I want to plug those as well.
Maybe we can have him back on to expand a little more at some point in time, because, like I've told you, these how many ever months we're doing this, 1 hour seems fine, but now when we start doing it, you get to the 30-minute mark and you're like, oh, that's fine, but like you get 20 minutes left and you're like, well, I've got so much more to talk about. But I think he would be a fun one to have back on at some point.
He would. We'll do that.
So, all right, folks. Well, you've hung on long enough with us. We're at the hour and 10-minute mark. Don't mean to keep you on Thursday night. After all, tomorrow is Friday. Do me a favor and tune in to Darkness Dave tomorrow at 8:00. Sounds like he's going to be talking about some underwater cryptids that might be interesting.
Also, have a great 4th of July, and we will see you back.
All right, folks. Be safe, and God bless everybody.